We're going to start our third panel with a paper by Jeff Richmond-Moll, who is a doctoral student in the Department of Art History at the University of Delaware, studying 19th and early 20th century American art. He's a recent recipient of the Elsa Mellon Bruce Predoctoral Fellowship for Historians of American Art to travel abroad from the Center for Advanced Study in the Visual Arts at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. He graduated from Princeton University with an AB in art history and received a graduate certificate in Christian studies from Westminster Theological Seminary in Philadelphia. He has worked in the curatorial departments of numerous museums, including the New York Historical Society, the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, and the Princeton University Art Museum. In 2014, he organized the exhibition Blessed Are the Peacemakers, Violet Oakley's The Angel of Victory at the Delaware Art Museum, which forms the basis of his talk today.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure and a privilege, too, to be here today. And thanks to the conference organizers and to Yale and to the other presenters. It's been a really fascinating conference so far, so it's all very exciting. So I'm going to get started. Despite its completion, just 2 weeks after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor and the United States' entry into World War II, Violet Oakley's The Angel of Victory nevertheless announces peace and victory to its viewer. War and peace may indeed appear paradoxical at this volatile point in American and world history, but this paper will show how Oakley negotiated the violence of this moment by infusing her largely unstudied wartime works with her lifelong vision for a just and peaceful world. The Archangel Michael at left and St. George at right stand with swords sheathed, having already defeated their evil reptilian foes, while the angel Gabriel extends a palm of victory and peace at center. With the victory against evil already guaranteed here, Oakley declares America's own fight to be unloseable, thereby providing constantly embattled troops with a hope, comfort, and confidence that peace one day would come. And the certainty and sanctity of American victory in Oakley's altarpiece echoes, I think, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's words to Congress just one day after Pearl Harbor. Roosevelt declared, "No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory. With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph. So help us God." The Angel of Victory provided a prophetic vision and perhaps even a scriptural grounding for Roosevelt's and the nation's faith in a future American triumph. As FDR's declaration suggests, then, the painting's epic apocalyptic language is not idiosyncratic. Instead, it evokes broader American sentiments regarding war itself and the role of art in times of military conflict. Timely questions given our many recent opportunities to reflect on imagery in wartime, from the centennial of World War I to contemporary conflicts abroad. Yet it's perhaps most fitting that on this 70th anniversary of the Allied victory in Europe, we should examine Oakley's triptych. This is a proleptic picture of certain triumph, painted at the advent of war, and intended for a naval base that became a major embarkation point for American troops headed to Europe. In short, Oakley's painting is a preemptive VE Day proclamation. In addition to the fact that Oakley's career as a whole and her wartime works in particular have received little attention among historians, her altarpieces are helpful in correcting the current critical understanding of religious art in the Second World War. In his 2014 book, The Great and Holy War, Philip Jenkins argues that, unlike the essentially Christian nature of the First World War, World War II was, quote, starkly different in its religious character. For Jenkins, and I quote again, "The Second World War produced no overtly religious manifestations vaguely comparable with those of the first, making it very difficult to find propaganda imagery depicting supernatural intervention on the battlefield of the kind that was so commonplace a generation earlier." And here are works from that World War I generation. In short, Jenkins writes, angels steered clear of this conflict. So what then of the Angel of Victory? What of the many other altarpieces painted for American chaplains throughout World War II? These works begin to suggest how this war was, in fact, represented and understood in supernatural terms, that visions and apparitions did indeed visit troops stationed at home and on the battlefront, despite Jenkins and others' assertions to the contrary. In addition, then, to reconciling the peace Oakley envisioned in December 1941 with the conflict to come, I hope to account for the religious character of her efforts in an era when, as Jenkins and other writers have argued, public religion was otherwise believed to have been wrecked beyond recovery. An illustrator, portraitist, and the first American woman to find fame in the burgeoning field of public mural painting, Oakley devoted her 60-year career to a quest for peace. Inspired by the Quaker faith, she adopted the slogan that pacifists are not pacivists, but peacemakers. Oakley thus considered her art to be a vehicle for social change, believing that beauty could lift up communities and bring about an ethical society. And so in a speech entitled "The Place of Art in an Embattled World," given at the Contemporary Club in New York City in March 1940, Oakley described a dream in which she spoke with Adolf Hitler, and appealing to his years as an amateur artist, attempted to persuade the Nazi leader on these terms. Quote, "I seem to be urging him to return to his abandoned art, to seek to express himself in beauty rather than by violence. I said, how much better, how much happier to do that which will make mankind love you than create a world all about you of hate and fear." 1 year later, following America's entry into World War II, and at nearly 70 years old, Oakley continued this personal and artistic mission by joining with the Citizens Committee of the Army and Navy. While originally founded to provide leisure materials and entertainment to boost troop morale, the committee adopted a new initiative in fall 1941 to produce portable triptychs, or three-paneled altarpieces, for use on American battleships, military bases, and airfields around the world. And by war's end, the committee would send 460 triptychs by 70 painters and sculptors to 5 continents, with Oakley painting 25. Here I show postcards on the right there of 2 later wartime triptychs, each of which has its own story that I'll briefly touch on later. Oakley was one of the first artists to collaborate on the triptych campaign. But her interest in the triptych format began long before the war. Indeed, Oakley had an abiding fascination with medieval and Renaissance art and literature, filling her home even by 1914 with curiosities from her European travels, like this 14th century Italian triptych. And while her early murals often drew on this 3-paneled format, her 1924 design of an altarpiece for the alumni house, at Vassar College will be her first standalone triptych and would have a lasting influence on her artistic efforts. In fact, Oakley described her design for her second wartime triptych, Christ Stilling the Storm, seen below here, as being directly in the vein of that Vassar altarpiece. Intriguingly, in Oakley's Citizens Committee collaborations, the artist's pacifism did not prompt an outright objection to the war effort. Praised at the end of her career for capturing the triumph of love over hatred and law and order over a fallen humanity, Oakley instead used her wartime works to portray men resurrected, relationships restored, great conflicts resolved, and a world redeemed. And this, too, is the message of the Angel of Victory. In this battle against evil that was the Second World War, good would inevitably prevail. Studies for the altarpiece indicate that Oakley initially chose the Apostle Paul's words at the end of Romans 8 as her inscription, comparing the American troops to emboldened conquerors in a spiritual army, and their military campaigns abroad to an epic eschatological battle, quote, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. And this text anticipates rhetoric of American leaders like General Dwight D. Eisenhower, who declared before D-Day in 1944 that his troops were embarking on a great crusade. So the triptych participates in a broader contemporary American tendency to elevate the nation's cause to universal, even biblical proportions, to see war, as Paul Addison writes, quote, as a myth which enshrined Americans and Britain's essential purity, a parable of good and evil, unquote. Many other artists took up the epic themes of warrior saints and angels, too. A triptych for the attacked transport ship USS Haywood shows St. George as an ancestral Christian soldier watching over a marching infantry battalion. And in an altarpiece for the Fort Benning Airborne School, a kneeling armored angel looks more like a heavenly paratrooper, staring with his American compatriot at falling parachutes beneath a bright white cross. Two of Oakley's sketches for an unexecuted wartime altarpiece entitled The Whole Armor contains similar ironclad figures, which recall Michael and St. George from her Angel of Victory. Rather than specific biblical or mythological characters, these are purely symbolic, clad with the breastplate of righteousness, the shield of faith, the helmet of salvation, as the accompanying inscription states. But in both cases, Oakley's armored angels and saints quite literally embody the greater, almost spiritual cause of American troops, which one New York Times author described in this way. Our men have been brought up in ways of worship which call themselves by different names. They're Catholics, Protestants, Jews. But religion, by whatever name, is a part of the American way of life, the way of life which these men, once peaceful citizens, have become fighting men to preserve. So the faith with which these painted figures were girded was the faith that American troops were deployed to defend. Despite the emphasis in her initial inscription on the certainty of victory, for as Paul writes in Romans 8, neither death nor life nor things present nor things to come nor anything else in all creation can overcome the power of God, Oakley eventually abandoned the passage, perhaps due to its militaristic, conquest-oriented tone. Instead, she selected inscriptions that describe a heavenly victory that had already been achieved, and on humanity's behalf. At left, she paired the text on Michael's defeat of the great dragon in Revelation 12 with an image of that archangel as he sheathes his sword and stands atop the vanquished beast. And at center, the words surrounding Gabriel announce those glad tidings that Christ's birth has brought, quote, peace on earth, goodwill toward men, while also including Christ's command to Peter upon his arrest by the Roman soldiers to put up thy sword. With the battle won and all conflict ceased, Oakley's triptych is an apocalyptic vision that predicts an end to global strife in an ideal world of universal community at the climax of history. So it's perhaps unsurprising that Oakley first expressed this religious neo-Hegelian perspective in response to the First World War. Two canvases, The Woman Clothed with the Sun and The Old Serpent Cast Out, convey Oakley's desire for global reconciliation and unity amidst international conflict. Originally exhibited at the Architectural League of New York in 1916, the compositions would later form part of her 1924 altarpiece, The Great Wonder, A Vision of the Apocalypse, from Vassar. In The Old Serpent, Oakley surrounded the scene with the very text that would later encircle St. George in the Angel of Victory, and similarly perched the Archangel Michael atop that serpent, or Satan, as he casts it out of heaven. Meanwhile, The Woman Clothed with the Sun captures the story from Revelation of the man-child who was to rule all nations, as the text describes, and who escapes the devouring jaws of the dragon as he's lifted up to a celestial throne. This apocalyptic scene insists that, despite the chaos of this present age, humanity will come together at the end of time and find peace under a single heavenly government. In these canvases, which constitute her first reaction to the Great War, Oakley responded to the troubling, unstable political climate with the very same subjects she would later employ at the onset of World War II. And yet, as Oakley embarked on her first wartime triptych in 1941, one wonders why she selected such veiled references to an eschatological age of peace and unity. Why not employ more explicitly pacifist or ardently anti-war imagery like the incarcerated insurrectionist Christ of George Bellow's Blessed Are the Peacemakers, or the condemning assemblage of the instruments of human cruelty in Claude Buck's The Things That Are Caesar's? Perhaps Oakley realized that the main significance of her altarpieces was not their personal political import, but the service that the Citizens Committee hoped the triptychs might provide. As one publication states, the triptychs were to carry comfort and strength to this generation in its overwhelming task of defending the present and preserving the future. I think that's a line that we've heard a lot so far in this conference, that kind of language. And so, though rare within American Protestantism, and perhaps even contrary to its mode of worship, wherein Christ's incorporeal word, rather than his physical body, is what provides access to God, wartime triptychs nevertheless developed a unique Protestant purpose. Sally Promy and David Morgan have suggested that these wartime altarpieces provided visual technology for the transaction between divine and human realms. And this is quite true. So the members of the Citizens Committee describe how triptychs uniquely helped chaplains to hold unsevered the connection between man and God. And likewise, chaplains like Jerome Sullivan of the USS Pennsylvania wrote of how the men under their charge had, quote, felt the long arm of the Lord outstretched to save and protect them on numerous occasions, unquote. And so the seagoing subject matter of a painting like Oakley's Christ Walking on the Water, a version of which was displayed aboard the USS Pennsylvania, not only communicated divine truths to the troops, but also served as a sort of patron saint, able to intercede on their behalf. So it's unsurprising, for instance, that Oakley's Madonna of the Sea was welded to the bulkhead in the mess hall of the USS Leedstown and became a permanent fixture of that ship. The specificity of a triptych subject for its intended military audience hence became a spiritual imperative. And what served Oakley well in this regard was her admiration of Italian poet Dante Alighieri, particularly his talent for fusing eternal themes with contemporary subjects. Since the Angel of Victory was intended for Brooklyn's Floyd Bennett Airfield, which was a naval air station defending New York City during the war, Oakley's sketches show her efforts to include particularized renderings of American airmen to accompany her angelic central figures. Yet Oakley also searched for biblical and historical models that merged the mission of these airmen with that of their heavenly counterparts. So as we've seen, the warrior Michael could serve as a timeless emblem for fighter pilots in their airborne warfare. And small details like link the central figures to the aviators, like the gold designs on Gabriel's heavenly vestments, which echo the airmen's parachute harnesses, or the dove of the Holy Spirit above Gabriel's head, which parallels the naval aviator badge below him. Tying scenes to their military audience made these divine figures more accessible, more receptive to their entreaties, and hence more efficient tools in what Promy and Morgan call this economy of ritualized exchange in which the sacred images performed. But these images were not solely a means of ritualized transaction. They were also outward signs of God's presence and promises in places where divinity otherwise seemed most absent. Constructed from lightweight materials, triptychs allowed troops to erect a makeshift church anywhere. A photo of Oakley's Christ stilling the storm beneath the gun turrets of the USS Massachusetts attests, and one Citizens Committee member also noted that, quote, triptychs can be set up in a jiffy. And whether it's in a steaming jungle or on the rolling deck of a fighting ship or in the back of a truck under the fire of guns, there is created an altar, a church. Chaplains and soldiers describe the transformative, even transportive quality of triptychs, recounting how the churchly appearance of the altarpiece produced a dignified spiritual atmosphere which overcame the clamor and ugliness of war. And as the founder of the Citizens Committee's triptych campaign, Louise Morgan, once said, "At the camps, there seemed to be no beauty anywhere. At stations where there are no chapels, we supply little movable altars and triptychs, and there you have a nice little church before you." Letters also poured into the Citizens Committee headquarters praising the triptych's atmospheric effects. One anonymous soldier wrote of an Oakley triptych on the eve of battle, "You can undoubtedly imagine what a crew's mess hall looks like and sounds like, with steam pipes hissing, fans and blowers rumbling, someone on the deck above hammering, and the smell of food cooking. However, amid all this, we held our divine services this morning. But there was one essential item, a triptych, which, when placed atop a mess table draped with a cloth, took all the inconveniences to worship away and made the hall almost a cathedral." These spatial effects recall Belden Lane's remarks about sacred space as very often an ordinary place ritually set apart to become extraordinary. For just as in photographs like these, where the men gather below 3 towering turrets to sit, pause, and gaze inwardly in silence on this stern deck normally awash in frenzied action and the booming of guns, wherever an altar was, there too was a church. Moreover, just as triptychs in the Middle Ages were said to fold inward and thereby hold their sacred images in violet, modern altarpieces came to be described as spiritual armor that could shield soldiers' souls against the dehumanizing nature of combat. In photographs of religious services in the field, one commentator wrote, we find two seemingly incongruous objects of the ancient past. Quote, the medieval shape of the helmet worn by the United Nations men and the triptych, which appear among such strange new shapes as those of the robot bomb, the bazooka, the jeep, the bulldozer, the tank, the airplane, the submarine. In fact, one U.S. Army brigadier general described, quote, a colorful and impressive outdoor ceremony to dedicate an infantry division artillery unit's new altarpiece of St. Barbara, the patron saint of artillerymen. He wrote, the massed colors of the artillery organizations of the division flanked the work, which was mounted on two of our howitzers. The inspiring ceremony will long be remembered by those present. And while Army triptychs were painted on plywood panels, Navy altarpieces were made of bulletproof steel. This was due to the fact, of course, that ships needed to throw any flammable materials overboard before sailing into battle, and hence any triptych had to be non-flammable. But the very bulletproof materiality of naval triptychs heightens these shielding associations. Juxtaposed with the defenses of modern warfare, altarpieces quite literally developed this armor-like protective status. As the Citizens Committee insisted, the triptych in all its beauty was as necessary to man's soul as the implements of war are necessary for the soldier. With American troops battling to preserve faith, family, and freedom, a task in which the triptych as a sacred bulwark was indispensable, artists certainly understood the production of altarpieces to be a patriotic and a spiritual duty. Of course, since the war essentially halted the sale of most artworks, triptychs were also one primary and popular means of artistic expression at the time. Because most finished triptychs went straight to their wartime destinations before they could be shown in public, studies and drawings like these on the screen allowed artists to continue displaying their work before an American civilian audience. Oakley exhibited preparatory studies at venues like the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Corcoran, the Pennsylvania Academy. Still, artists received only token wages for each triptych, just $200 for materials and roughly 4 weeks of work. And the elderly Philadelphia-based Oakley was also somewhat of an outlier in this triptych movement. Most artists worked in New York and were much younger or lesser known. By putting aside her more lucrative illustration and portrait projects and instead feverishly producing and exhibiting triptychs, Oakley proved that they were central to both her personal artistic vision and her professional aspirations. Perhaps she also found the military a more suitable audience for her religious symbolism, since even by 1940, as Patricia Lykos claims, her esoteric imagery had very little appeal for a broader public intrigued by surrealism and abstraction and disillusioned by 2 world wars and a depression. To conclude, Oakley also understood the moral and spiritual imperative of the triptych campaign, and she was rewarded for this commitment to it. Many altarpieces were dedicated in impressive, formal military ceremonies where artists like Oakley, who's seen in the center of the photograph, were praised for their artistic contributions to the war effort. The desire to equate an artist's work with military service recalls strategies of war posters from both world wars, like "Rivets are bayonets, drive them home," which compared the tasks of factory workers at home to the fight abroad in sometimes quite violent fashion. Yet the connections between altarpieces and their makers in World War II were more complex. Altarpieces embodied not only divine messages, but also the artists themselves. In this key moment in American history, when the aspirations of artists and the anxieties of the nation were expressed in universalizing biblical terms, these triptychs gave artists a uniquely symbolic means of joining the war, as surrogates sent into battle on their creator's behalf. One New York Times author wrote this: "Many of the altarpieces will come back as battle-scarred as any veteran or lie with the good ship that bore it at the bottom of the sea, but all will have served the cause that is the cause of all of us." Thank you.